Love, passion, betrayal, and tragedy. Wrestling has always blurred the line between reality and story, between what fans see in the ring and what happens behind the curtains. But sometimes the real life relationships of wrestlers become darker, more dramatic, and more destructive than anything a promoter could script. In wrestling, relationships often collapse under the pressure of fame, constant travel, and personal demons. What starts off as romance could spiral into jealousy, violence, addiction, betrayal, or even tragedy. To explore them, we'll be using the iceberg format. Imagine an iceberg floating in the ocean, and what you see above the water is just the beginning, the popular and the well-known couples. But as we go deeper and deeper beneath the surface, we uncover lesser-known and non-mainstream relationships. This is the toxic wrestling couples iceberg. Sit tight and let's go. Starting with Tier 4, Chris and Nancy Benoit. We're starting this iceberg with the most notorious toxic wrestling couple of all time. Chris and Nancy were once seen as a power couple in wrestling, two respected figures from different sides of the industry. Nancy had made a name for herself in WCW as woman, managing Ric Flair, Kevin Sullivan, the Four Horsemen, and other top names, while Benoit was considered to be one of the most gifted technical wrestlers in the world. But behind the curtains, things were far from perfect. Their relationship began with controversy. Nancy was married to wrestler Kevin Sullivan when she started dating Chris Benoit, who was also married at the time, and that real-life affair blurred with an on-screen storyline. Fans saw it as compelling TV, but it sparked real resentments backstage. Over time, Chris and Nancy's marriage became rocky, marked by constant travel, personal disputes, and reports of domestic strain. She also reportedly filed a restraining order against him in 2003, which she later dropped. The tragedy, of course, came in 2007 when Benoit murdered Nancy and their son Daniel before taking his own life. The double murder-suicide shocked the world forever and tarnished Benoit's wrestling legacy. The relationship went from a headline-making affair to one of the darkest chapters in wrestling history. This couple is placed high on the iceberg because their story just isn't about toxicity. It ended in an unthinkable tragedy that changed the wrestling industry forever. The Macho Man Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth. If Hulk Hogan was the face of the WWF in the 80s, then Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth were the hearts. On screen, they were wrestling's ultimate power couple, the Macho Man and his elegant valet, the perfect pairing of madness and grace. Fans adored Elizabeth, and Savage's intensity made every storyline with her feel real. But the real-life relationship was far more complicated. Savage was deeply protective, many would say controlling, of Elizabeth. Reports from wrestlers at the time described Savage as jealous and paranoid, often refusing to let Elizabeth change in the same locker room as other women and watching her every move on the road. It even got to the point where he began to lock her up in closets and locker rooms to quote-unquote protect her from other men. Their toxic dynamics spilled into storylines, most famously with Hulk Hogan, where Savage accused him of trying to steal Elizabeth, a story rooted in Savage's real-life insecurities. The pair eventually got divorced in 1992, but their story didn't end there. Elizabeth went on to work in WCW with Savage, where she became involved with other wrestlers like Lex Luger, and sadly, her life ended tragically in 2003 from a drug and alcohol overdose while living with Luger. Savage himself died years later, leaving behind a complicated legacy, both as one of wrestling's greatest performers and as half of one of the most toxic yet unforgettable wrestling couples of all time. Triple H and Chyna. Triple H and Chyna were not just a couple, they were partners in climbing to the top of the WWF. Together, they became a force in DX, with Chyna breaking down barriers for women as a muscular dominant figure in an era where women were mostly managers or eye candy. But as Triple H's career rose, cracks in their relationship began to form. The turning point came when Triple H began a relationship with Stephanie McMahon, who was or who is the daughter of Vince McMahon, while he was still with Chyna. On screen, it started off as a storyline romance, but off screen, it became real. Chyna later revealed that she discovered the affair firsthand, and the betrayal devastated her. Not only did she lose her relationship, but she soon lost her spot in the WWF as well. While Triple H went on to marry Stephanie and became one of the most powerful figures in wrestling, Chyna's life spiraled downwards. She left WWF, struggled with addiction, and made appearances in adult films, but could never really escape the shadow of her breakup and exile from WWE. She passed away in 2016, and many fans still see her treatment as one of the industry's greatest injustices. This relationship just wasn't toxic, it altered the entire course of wrestling history. Edge and Lita. Few scandals rocked WWE, quite like the real-life affair between Edge and Lita. At the time, Lita was dating her longtime partner Matt Hardy, a relationship that fans loved and seemed inseparable. But when Hardy discovered that Lita was having an affair with Edge, his real-life best friend, the fallout was explosive. The situation became public after Hardy vented online, and WWE actually fired him over the drama, only to bring him back when fan backlash became overwhelming. Vince McMahon took the real-life betrayal and turned it into an on-screen storyline, with Edge and Lita positioned as the villains against Matt Hardy. Crowds booed them viciously, chanting, "You screwed Matt," at every match, electric with real emotion. Edge and Lita leaned into their villain roles, becoming one of the most hated duos in wrestling history. The infamous live sex celebration segment on Raw pushed the scandal even further, blurring the line between storyline and reality. Eventually, Lita retired in 2006 and Edge's career skyrocketed, and over time, they had to break up due to the drama surrounding them. But their time together left behind one of WWE's most notorious scandals, proof that sometimes the best wrestling storylines are ripped straight from real life. Matt Hardy and Lita. Now, on the flip side of this scandal was the implosion of Matt Hardy's and Lita's long-term relationship. They had been together for years, with Lita often appearing alongside the Hardy Boys during WWE's Attitude Era. Fans loved them as a couple, but behind the scenes, things fell apart when Lita began her relationship with Edge. Matt's heartbreak was very public, as he lashed out online and in interviews, venting his pain. Fans sided with him, turning him into a cult hero against Edge and Lita. When WWE brought him back, the feud was as real as it gets. Fans weren't just watching his storyline, they were watching Matt work out his betrayal on live TV. Though Matt eventually moved on and rebuilt his career in TNA and later AEW, the scandal defined a major part of his wrestling story. For Lita, her image took a massive hit as she went from the beloved women's wrestler to one of the most booed figures in the company. Their breakup is remembered as one of wrestling's most infamous and messiest relationships. Stone Cold Steve Austin and Deborah. Stone Cold Steve Austin is often seen as wrestling's biggest star, the beer-drinking, anti-authority Texas rattlesnake who carried WWE through the Attitude Era. But his personal life with former WWE Women's Champion Deborah was much darker than his TV persona suggested. The couple got married in 2000, but their relationship was marred by reports of domestic abuse. In 2002, Austin was arrested after allegedly assaulting Deborah, and while charges were eventually dropped, Deborah later spoke publicly about the abuse, describing years of fear and intimidation. She also claimed that WWE turned a blind eye to Austin's behavior to protect his star power. Austin has rarely addressed the allegations, but the arrests and accusations left a lasting stain on his personal reputation. Unlike some other toxic wrestling couples whose issues were rooted in jealousy or betrayal, Austin and Deborah's story is remembered for its violence and the way it exposed the darker side of wrestling culture at the time. Hulk Hogan and Linda Hogan. If you watched Hogan Knows Best in the mid-2000s, you probably remember Hulk Hogan and his wife Linda playing the role of the perfect wrestling family. But behind the reality TV cameras, their marriage was falling apart. By 2007, Linda filed for divorce, accusing Hogan of cheating, financial irresponsibility, and neglect. The split quickly turned bitter and public, with Hogan facing lawsuits, tabloid scandals, and rumors of affairs with younger women, including one of his daughter's close friends. The divorce drained Hogan financially, costing him a huge portion of his fortune, and tarnished the family man image that he'd built up for decades. Linda moved on to date a much younger man, while Hogan faced years of personal and professional setbacks, including the infamous leaked tape and the racial slur scandal. While not as violent or as tragic as some of the other couples on this list, Hogan and Linda's toxic marriage exposed the dysfunction behind wrestling's most famous household and showed how even the most polished public image can come crumbling down. And now we're moving down the iceberg into tier 3. Lex Luger and Miss Elizabeth. After her marriage to the Macho Man ended, Miss Elizabeth seemed destined to move away from the chaos of wrestling. but instead she found herself drawn back into it, this time with Lex Luger. In the 90s and the early 2000s, the two were a couple both in WCW and in real life. But what might have seemed like a new start for Elizabeth soon spiraled into another tragic chapter. By this point, Luger was battling addiction to painkillers, alcohol, and steroids. Elizabeth, who had always been viewed as wrestling's elegant and most untouchable first lady, was drawn into that destructive lifestyle. Their home life was filled with substance abuse, and the once beloved valet became caught in a cycle of dysfunction. In 2003, it all came crashing down. Elizabeth died in their suburban Atlanta home at just 42 years old. The cause of death was ruled as acute toxicity from a mixture of pills and vodka. When police searched their home, they found a massive stash of drugs, painkillers, steroids, narcotics, enough to suggest that their lives had spiraled far out of control. Luger was arrested, though not for her death directly, but for drug possession and other charges. Elizabeth's passing devastated wrestling fans. She had gone from the wholesome counterbalance to Randy Savage's intensity to a tragic casualty of the wrestling lifestyle. Lex Luger eventually turned his life around, finding religion and sobriety, but he's often visibly haunted when speaking about Elizabeth. The relationship is a reminder of just how addiction and toxic love can destroy even the most iconic figures. Jimmy Snuka and Nancy Argentino. Jimmy Superfly Snuka was one of wrestling's earliest superstars, a wild, high-flying sensation whose dives off the top rope made him a fan favorite in the 80s. But behind the roar of the crowd was a darker story, one that remains one of wrestling's greatest tragedies. In May 1983, Snuka was traveling with his girlfriend, Nancy Argentino. They stayed at a motel in Pennsylvania, but what happened there has haunted wrestling fans for decades. Nancy was found unconscious and critically injured. Snuka claimed that she slipped and hit her head on the side of the road earlier that day, but the evidence told a different story. Nancy had dozens of cuts and bruises, and the coroner's report described her death as a homicide. Despite these suspicious findings, no charges were filed at the time. Rumors spread that Vince McMahon himself met with the investigators and helped to smooth things over to protect his rising star. For years, Argentino's family fought for justice, insisting that Snuka had been violent with Nancy and that her death was no accident. It wasn't until 2015, more than 30 years later, that Snuka was formally charged with murder. But by then, he was suffering from dementia and cancer, and the case was dropped because he was declared unfit to stand trial. He later died in 2017, never facing justice. The Snuka-Nancy story is remembered as one of wrestling's greatest, darkest shadows. A glamorous young woman's life ended far too soon, and the man responsible spent decades as a celebrated icon, leaving behind questions that will never really be answered. Paige and Alberto Del Rio. When Paige and Alberto Del Rio announced their relationship in 2016, it shocked the wrestling world. Paige was a young star, a product of WWE's developmental system, seen as the future of women's wrestling, and Del Rio was older, going through a divorce, and carried a reputation for controversy and arrogance. Many fans immediately saw the red flags, including myself. The relationship quickly became a circus. They were constantly in the headlines, sometimes for gushy social media posts, but more often than not for disturbing incidents. One of the most infamous happened at an airport in Florida, where police were called after an altercation between them turned physical. Paige later claimed that she was the victim of abuse, while Del Rio tried to paint himself as the wrong party. Compounding the drama was Paige's leaked private videos, adding humiliation to an already messy public relationship. WWE, clearly uncomfortable, suspended Paige and distanced themselves from Del Rio. Fans worried that Paige's career, which had started with so much promise, would be derailed by the toxic chaos surrounding her personal life. Though they eventually split, the damage was done. Paige never fully recovered in the ring due to injury, and Del Rio's reputation fell apart completely after later criminal allegations unrelated to Paige. The relationship is remembered as a train wreck in real time, one that fans couldn't look away from, and one that left scars on both of their legacies. Shawn Michaels and Sonny. In the mid-90s, Tammy "Sonny" Sitch was at the top of the world. She was young, charismatic, and quickly became the most downloaded woman on the internet, a true crossover star. But as Sonny's fame rose, her personal life became tangled in a web of toxic relationships, most infamously with Shawn Michaels. Sonny had been with Chris Candido since high school, and the two entered the wrestling world together. But while Chris worked hard in the ring, Sonny was caught up in the glitz of WWF, and her relationship with Shawn Michaels was an open secret. Backstage, it caused endless tension. Shawn himself was spiraling during that time, known for his drug use, partying, and arrogance. Together, he and Sonny fed into each other's worst impulses. And for Chris Candido, Sonny's boyfriend, it was a nightmare, humiliated by his partner's affairs and yet still hopelessly loyal to her. Though Sonny and Shawn's relationship fizzled out, it became symbolic of the chaos of the Attitude Era locker room, where sex, drugs, and ego ran rampant. For Sonny, it was just another step down a tragic path that would see her go from WWF's golden girl to one of wrestling's darkest cautionary tales. Sonny and Chris Candido. Sonny and Chris Candido were childhood sweethearts who entered wrestling together, dreaming of making it big. And for a while, they did, especially Sonny, who became WWF's breakout female star of the mid-90s. But while she basked in the spotlight, Chris Candido was often overshadowed and humiliated. Sonny openly cheated on him with other wrestlers, including Shawn Michaels and Davey Boy Smith, and everyone in the locker room knew. Candido remained loyal, even as she mocked him and flaunted her affairs. The relationship became one of the most lopsided and toxic partnerships in wrestling history. One party devoted and the other one spiraling into ego and excess. Despite it all, they stayed together until Candido's tragic death in 2005 from complications after surgery. Sonny never fully recovered. Her life went off the rails. Drugs, arrests, multiple stints in jail, and eventually charges connected to a DUI-related car crash. Looking back, many fans see Chris Candido as one of wrestling's most underappreciated talents, weighed down by his toxic loyalty to a partner who ultimately dragged both of them into tragedy. X-Pac and Chyna. If Chyna's breakup with Triple H was the beginning of her decline, then her relationship with X-Pac was her final descent. After leaving WWE, Chyna's life spiraled into substance abuse, legal troubles, and public meltdowns. Her romance with X-Pac, he himself struggling with addiction, was a combustible pairing. Their relationship was infamous for its volatility. They argued constantly, sometimes violently, and they both later admitted that drugs and alcohol fueled their worst behavior. Together, they filmed an adult movie that was released to the public, something that Chyna herself later regretted, but which only cemented her tabloid reputation. X-Pac would later admit that their time together was destructive, saying that they once loved each other, but they brought out the worst in each other. And for Chyna, this relationship marked the final step in her fall from one of WWE's most groundbreaking women to a tragic cautionary tale. John Morrison and Melina Perez. In WWE's mid-2000s era, John Morrison and Melina were often inseparable, both on-screen and off-screen, but their relationship was plagued by rumors, jealousy, and constant backstage gossip. Rumors circulated that Melina had flings with other wrestlers, including top stars like Dave Bautista, which made Morrison look weak in the eyes of some in the locker room. Some wrestlers even claimed that Morrison's loyalty to Melina, despite the drama that she caused backstage, hurt his career immensely. Instead of standing up for himself, he was seen as passive, and management allegedly held it against him for some reason. Melina herself had a reputation for clashing with other women and causing tension backstage, making the couple a constant source of whispers behind the curtain. For years, they continued an on-again, off-again relationship, simmering with toxicity. Eventually, they split for good after Melina posted John Morrison's quote-unquote special medication, Viagra, online, but the damage was done. Neither ever reached their full potential in WWE, and fans still debate how much their messy relationship held them back. Unlike the other couples on this list, John Morrison and Melina didn't end in tragedy, but their story is often remembered as one of missed opportunities, fueled by jealousy and drama. Kurt Angle and Karen Angle, now Karen Jarrett. Kurt Angle was already considered to be one of the greatest wrestlers alive when his personal life took center stage in TNA. He and his wife Karen were heavily featured on screen, but behind the cameras, their relationship was unraveling. Kurt was rumored and confirmed to be unfaithful to Karen, and she, in her best way, retorted in the most humiliating way possible for Kurt. She left him for Jeff Jarrett, the company's founder. Now, this just wasn't a personal betrayal, it was a scandal that rocked TNA to its very core. Jarrett was suspended when the affair came to light, and there were genuine questions about whether the company could survive the trauma. For Kurt, it was devastating, but it was well deserved. Not only had he lost his wife, but the affair was turned into storyline fodder, rubbing salt in the wound as fans watched elements of his private life play out on TV. Eventually, Karen married Jeff, and the two became an on-screen power couple in TNA, and they're still together to this day. Kurt carried on, but the bitterness between him and Jarrett lasted for years. This love triangle blurred the line of kayfabe and reality in the most toxic way, leaving Kurt exposed and humiliated in front of the entire world.